Call of the Wild, Chapter 7. Out of the Harness. It was a beautiful spring weather. It was beautiful spring weather, but neither dogs nor people could see it. Every day the sun came up earlier and went down later, and all day it shone. The silence of the winter was broken by the great soft sound of the land waking up. As things began to live and move again after the long icy months. Trees turned green, birds sang, and from every hill came the sound of running water. Everywhere the snow was melting away, and the branches of the trees were bending and breaking. The sun ate away at the ice on the Yukon River from above, while the river pushed to break free from below. With life waking up all around them and the sun beating down, one day Charles, Hal, Mercedes, and their team of dogs walked slowly into John Thornton's camp. Mercedes was crying, Hal was shouting, and the dogs dropped down as if they were dead. Charles, his eyes watering, sat down to rest, and Hal walked over to talk to John Thornton. John Thornton had been camped at the mouth of the White River since December. His feet had become frozen in the winter, so his friends had left him there to get well while they went up the river to get a raft. Thornton was working when the Americans arrived, cutting an axe handle from a piece of wood. He knew immediately what these people were like. Hal asked him what he thought about the trail, but Thornton knew that Hal would not listen to anything he said. "The ice is breaking," Thornton told him. "The bottom of the trail will fall out any moment." That means the ice will break. "They told us that up above," replied Hal. "They told us we wouldn't get to White River, but here we are." "They were right," said Thornton. "You've only got here with the luck of fools. You were lucky. I'll tell you honestly, I wouldn't go on to that ice for all the gold in the Northland." "That's because you're not a fool, I suppose," said Hal. "Well, we're going on to Dawson." He took out his whip. "Get up, Buck. Get up. Mush." Mush is a word means move. Thornton knew that he could not stop a fool, and he went on cutting his axe handle. But Hal could not get his team started. As the whip bit into the dogs left and right, John Thornton breathed in. He's getting angry. Sol-leks pulled himself up first, then Teek, and then came Joe, crying with pain. Pike fell twice, and then got up at last, but Buck did not move. He lay quietly where he had fallen. The whip bit into him again and again, but he did not cry or fight against it. Several times Thornton nearly spoke, but he stopped himself. Hal now took out his club and hit Buck hard, but Buck still refused to move. Like the other dogs, he could hardly move, but unlike them, he had decided not to get up. He had felt the thin ice breaking under his feet all day. He could feel that something terrible was going to happen up ahead on the ice, where his master was trying to send him. He was so tired and weak that the club did not hurt him very much. As Hal hit him again and again, the little flame of his life inside him died down. He could no longer feel anything. He just heard the noise of the club hitting his body. Then, suddenly, with a noise like the cry of an animal, John Thornton jumped on the man who held the club. Hal was thrown back, and Mercedes screamed, while Charles watched with his watery eyes. John Thornton was almost too angry to speak. "If you hit that dog again," he said at last, "I'll kill you." "It's my dog," Hal replied as he moved back towards Buck with blood on his mouth. "Get out of my way. I'm going to Dawson." Thornton was standing between Hal and Buck, and he did not move. Hal took out his knife, and Mercedes screamed again. Thornton hit Hal's hand with the wooden axe handle, and the knife fell to the ground. He hit Hal's hand again when he tried to reach for it. Then he picked the knife up himself and quickly cut Buck out of the harness. Hal had no fight left in him, and he could see that Buck was too near death to pull the sled. A few minutes later, the team went off down the river, and Buck lifted his head to watch. Pike was leading, and Joe, Teek, and Sol-leks were behind, all of them limping and falling. When you limp, it means you walk strangely because you have a problem with your leg. Mercedes, a woman, was sitting on the sled, with Hal walking at the front and Charles following behind. As Buck watched them, Thornton sat down next to him and with kind hands felt his body for broken bones. There were none, just terrible cuts from the club and whip on a body that had not had enough food for weeks. The sled was almost half a kilometer away now, and Buck and Thornton watched it going slowly over the ice. Suddenly, they saw the back of the sled drop down and heard Mercedes scream. They saw Charles turn around and try to run back. Then the ice all around the sled fell in, and in a moment the dogs and people were all gone. There was nothing left, just a big hole in the ice. The bottom had fallen out of the trail. John Thornton and Buck looked at each other. "You poor devil, kawaiso, you poor devil," said John Thornton, and Buck licked his hand. John Thornton had still been limping a little when Buck arrived in his camp. Remember, in the winter, his feet were frozen, so he has trouble walking now. But with the warm weather, he was soon moving easily again. Here, lying by the river through the long spring days, watching the water and listening to the songs of birds, Buck too slowly won back or got back his strength. The long rest felt very good after traveling nearly 5,000 kilometers. Buck has traveled 5,000 kilometers. John Thornton had two other dogs, Nig and a big black dog with eyes that laughed, a happy dog, and Skeet, a little Irish setter, sort of a brownish red dog. Skeet made friends with Buck at the beginning when he was too weak to fight her away. She washed and cleaned his cuts every day like a mother cat washing her kittens. So Skeet was licking Buck to clean his cuts every day. Slowly, the cuts got better, and Buck's body began to grow healthy and strong again. Buck was surprised to find that Skeet and Nig did not seem to be jealous of him. As he got stronger, they made him play all sorts of games, which Thornton joined in with too. Suddenly, Buck found that he had a new life. He felt love, real love, for the first time. For Judge Miller in the Santa Clara Valley, he had felt friendship. But for John Thornton, he felt wild, burning love. Maybe because John Thornton saved his life. Yes, this man had saved his life, but he was also the perfect master. His dogs were like children to him, and he never forgot a kind word for them. He loved to sit down with them for a long talk. But what Buck loved more than anything was when John Thornton put Buck's head between his hands with his own head on top and moved their heads from side to side. Sometimes when Thornton did this, Buck felt so happy he thought his heart would fall out of his body. Then, when it was finished, he would jump to his feet, his mouth laughing. And John Thornton would look at him and say, "Well, you can almost speak." To show his love, Buck would take Thornton's hand in his mouth and press his teeth gently into it. But while Skeet and Nig were always waiting for Thornton to touch them, most of the time Buck was happy just to lie and watch him. Buck watched for hours, looking into Thornton's face for every thought and following every move. Sometimes John Thornton would feel Buck's eyes on him and turn and look at him, his heart shining out of his eyes. Buck hated it if he could not see John Thornton. He was afraid that Thornton would go out of his life like Perrault, Francois, and the Scottish Canadian man. Often at night he would wake up full of fear. Then he would get up and walk through the cold to the tent, where he would listen outside for the sound of his master's breathing. But Buck's great love for Thornton did not make him soft. He was an animal of the wild that had come in to sit next to Thornton's fire, not a soft Southland dog. He would not steal things from John Thornton, but he would take things from any other man in any other camp. Skeet and Nig were too good-tempered, kind. They were too kind to fight, but Buck still fought as fiercely as ever with any new dog. He gave no mercy. He showed no kindness. He never stopped once. He started a fight to the death. He had learned his lesson well. Kill or be killed, eat or be eaten. Buck still felt the past living in him, and when he sat by John Thornton's fire at night, he felt every kind of dog behind him. He's imagining his past. All half-wolves and wild wolves were all there like shadows in the dark, tasting the meat he ate, thirsty for the water he drank. They smelled the wind with him, lay down to sleep with him, and dreamed with him. These shadows seemed to pull him away, and often in his mind he heard a call from deep in the forest. Then he left the fire and ran into the trees. He did not know where he was going or why, but he ran on deep into the forest until his love for John Thornton pulled him back to the fire again.